Hello and welcome back to the channel. Yes, you can. My name is Hannah. My mission on the channel is to empower the everyday individual with their home improvement projects. We are currently in a series on replacing outlets and light switches, and in this video, we are going to be looking at unique scenarios or situations that you may encounter. I want to start with a couple of caveats. The first one I mention in every video. Make sure that you have already looked into any local ordinances that would govern whether or not someone who isn't a licensed electrician can do these types of projects. The second caveat or disclaimer that I want to make is that I am not going to be doing an in-depth discussion of each one of these scenarios that I will bring up. My purpose in talking about them is to prepare you for what you may run into and just sort of give you an idea of things that you may want to research more. I know when I was working on the project, I would take a light switch or outlet out of the box, and it was sort of a surprise of what I was going to find. Sometimes it would be what I was expecting, but very often it wouldn't be. So we're gonna look at a handful of scenarios and a few tips or just things that you should know to have a general idea about what it entails. The first one, and I ran into this in almost every outlet or light switch I changed, was the fact that the wires would be in the back, or it's also called speed wiring, and I wanted to change them to side wiring. So a couple of things coming back to the last video I did, specifically about tools, that it's helpful to have a wire cutter or stripper, and I would say it's absolutely essential, not just helpful. And I also had this small tool, and you could also use a small screwdriver. So let's say we have the outlet, and it is all of the wires, when you pull it out, are connected in the back. And instead of them in the back, you want them to be around the terminal screws. So what do? Couple of things. The first thing that I would recommend trying is to use your small tool, whether it's this or a small screwdriver, and there's small holes in the back that the wires go into, and then right above that or maybe below that, there's just a teeny sort of rectangular space that you push your tool into, exert some pressure, and then that releases the wire that is right next to that. So in this situation, be right below it. I have found that it's a little bit challenging to get enough pressure and also be pulling out the wiring at the same time. You could have another person there to help you, or what I found, if I couldn't quite finagle that, would be to use my wire cutter and to cut as close as I could to the outlet. Another thing to keep in mind of which method you're doing to get the wire out is seeing how much extra wire you have to work with. If there isn't very much extra wire in the box, you probably want to try to get everything that has the exposed wire, so minus the insulation, out of the outlet and not just cut it, since then you're leaving a little bit of the wire in the old outlet. So after you cut it or get it out by having the wire released, whichever method you use, you then want to make sure that you have enough wire exposed, enough insulation off to wrap it around the terminal screw, and that you're having the wire connected and not the insulation around the screw itself. One thing I will say, on the back of most outlets, they have it's called a strip gauge, and so it gives you an idea of about how much insulation should be stripped. You will just want to, though, sort of eyeball it and for the amount that will be wrapped around the screw, since that amount, typically it should be sufficient, but depending on where you cut it, just want to make sure that you do have enough, but also not too much wire that's sort of hanging off the edge. The next scenario that I want to mention is if you have a switched outlet. So you have an outlet that is controlled by a light switch. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but the main thing that I wanted to highlight is, in order to get that outlet to function in that way, to be controlled by the light switch, you need to break off on the hot side. So the gold screws, there's a small tab in between the two screws. So I'm just gonna shift this around so you can see that little tab. So you'll use the needle nose pliers. I'm not gonna actually break this off since I'm gonna be using this outlet for another purpose, but you can hold on to the tab and then sort of move it back and forth to be able to get that to break off, so that then you will be able to have one side controlled by the light switch, and the power is not always flowing to it as it would be in a traditional outlet. The third situation I'm going to talk about is, let's say you have a phone jack, or I know I had some Ethernet, like coax cables that were in the wall, and if I wasn't intending to use that again, but instead wanted it to just not be an eyesore, there's, depending on what it is, in the next video we're gonna look at a phone jack specifically, but depending on what it is, get the old one out, and then these are very cheap, and just a blank wall plate, face plate, to be able to put over that opening, so that you can, you're not seeing that hole or phone jack or whatever it was, and it's sort of an easy way to get the wall or that space just to look a little bit better. Next scenario that I want to mention is a GFCI. I don't have one here to show, but a couple of things that I will speak to about it. First, what does it stand for? So it stands for Ground Flow Circuit Interrupter, GFCI. It may also be referred to as a GFI. And before I knew what it was, I referred to it as an outlet with a reset button. So if that's the way you want to refer to it instead of a GFCI, you are more than welcome to do that. So a couple of things. The wiring is going to be quite similar, but you will have a line and a load. So again, I don't have one here to show, but just a couple of things. So you may have the line, so coming, the power bringing it in, and then the load, so the wires going out to others on that circuit. Now you may not have both of those. I ran into that in my bathroom, that there weren't the load wires because it was the only one on the circuit. So a couple things, that gives just a little bit, a few details about it. So GFCIs are typically found in bathrooms or kitchens, specifically where there is likely to be more water, and they detect even small amounts of changes in the voltage flowing through the circuit. And so if someone would start to get a shock from it, it can shut off immediately. So it's for protection, it's a safety feature of having the GFCIs. I found that they were they weren't that much more difficult to change. In fact, almost easier, because the wires were not in the back. It was already side wired. So just was able to remove them, making sure that I had the line and load in the right place, or that if there wasn't a load, that I didn't have anything on that side of the GFCI. Another thing to note is they are more expensive. So just if not that any of these are that expensive, but as you're budgeting for costs, and just keeping in mind, if you're listing out what kinds do I need to get, to look for any of those with that reset button. The final scenario that I wanted to mention is if you have, or you're looking at you're replacing your outlet and you have multiple wires, more than two on each side, the hot or the neutral. So I did talk to someone who's worked with electrical projects a lot, and he recommended that if I had multiple wires and I only have 2 screws, to wrap more than one of those wires of the shepherd hook around the screw, and then tighten it as much as I could. One thing that I do want to note though, I'm not saying to do like one counterclockwise and one clockwise. Make sure that you have both, or if it's just one on one of them, that you have all of them that have the wire, the shepherd's hook, around the screw in a clockwise manner. That way, as you are tightening the screw, that the wire is tightening closer to the screw because it's put in clockwise. All right, with that does wrap up the last scenario that I wanted to mention. Again, as I said at the beginning, this is more to give you an idea of what you would run into and not an exhaustive list of scenarios you may face or all of the steps to take to deal with those. So look up other videos if any of these scenarios apply to you and this video, if it didn't feel like it provided enough information for you. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I would love to have you here in this community. Like the video and share any tips in the chat of things that you have faced and what has been helpful for you to navigate things that are a little bit out of the ordinary. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next video.